We live less than 90 miles from 3 Mile Island, and right in the downward kind of plume of the radiation.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. I can be naive as the next person. When I read the report in the New York Times by Ben Hubbard that Saudi Arabia had executed 37 people and that the Saudis were having problems with ISIS, I foolishly assumed that these executed people were all ISIS. Then I read Saudi dissident Ali al-Ahmed and Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, and found that almost all the people killed were Shia, and that the evidence for most of these people were confessions extracted under torture, that some were teenagers when arrested, and that the terrorist acts that they were accused of, convicted of, were often things like attending demonstrations against the miserable treatment of Shia. This young man protested the poverty that exists in a country with so many multi-billionaires. He was imprisoned for 3 years, tortured to the point that his spine was damaged. This man was dean of the English department of Jeddah University. On his way to Western Michigan University in 2012, he was stopped as he boarded the plane to the U.S. All of them were executed almost surely by decapitation. The same punishment that ISIS is so fond of and that they learned from the Saudis. These Saudis and Bahrainis protested in front of the London embassy of the Saudi regime. More about this at saudius.org. That brings us to the University of New Haven. Recently, I had an article in the New Haven Register where I called on famed forensic scientist Henry C. Lee to quit his position on the editorial board of the Journal of the Saudi Forensic Society because one of his bosses is Salah al-Tubaigi, who is alleged to have been the forensic scientist who brought a bone saw to Turkey during the interrogation and murder of Jamal Khashoggi. The bigger issue, of course, is University of New Haven training of Saudi police and military. This year, they are openly helping recruit faculty to the Saudi Police College. How many people will be more effectively processed through the grotesque Saudi justice system because of the skills and techniques learned from University of New Haven faculty? More on this at saudius.org.
In New Haven, Connecticut, newly released police body cam video shows the moment that a pair of police officers opened fire 16 times on a car. The fusillade shattered the car's windows and left 22-year-old Stephanie Washington hospitalized for days. The car's driver, 21-year-old Paul Witherspoon, escaped without injury. The April 16th shooting spawned a series of protests.
Yes, in Connecticut, there have been many protests of a shooting of people in a parked car where the driver tried to exit with his hands up. The police of Hamden, Connecticut, claimed there was a report of a possible armed robbery in the middle of the night. They found the suspected car in New Haven and called on Yale police for backup, which they received. Then they said that the car, which had been cornered, that the driver of the car exited in an abrupt manner. There are 2 other videos of this incident. It appears that the police arrived at the scene and started shooting almost immediately. 13 shots because someone opened a car door in a, quote, abrupt manner. Later, it was found that there was no weapons at all in the car, and apparently there hadn't even have been a robbery. No one was arrested. A passenger in the car was shot, and it looks like one of the policemen shot the other in the leg. This all took place in a minority neighborhood in New Haven, and Yale students showed their anger.
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No racist!
Police!
Hello, I'm Caleb Creighton. I'm part of the Yale Black Men's Union.
Woo!
We messed up. But the first thing I want to do is read you the email that Yale students received. Listen to this. I write to inform you about an incident that occurred early this morning. Preliminary information is that Hamden police officers, responding to reports of an armed robbery, stopped a vehicle at the intersection of Argyle Street and Dixwell Avenue. A Yale police officer responded to a request for assistance from the Hamden police. A Hamden police officer and the Yale police officer both discharged their weapons, and a passenger in the vehicle was struck. Fortunately, the injuries are not life-threatening. That's it. That's it. Here's what really happened. Officers, without correct information, opened fire on 2 innocent people driving at night. That's what happened. That's not what they told us. I want to prove something. Raise your hand if you have ever driven or know somebody that's driven after 12 a.m. That's you. That's you. That's you. But now let's say it's okay to say you're in fear for your life. Let's think about what the previous speakers have told us up to this point. Up to this point, we go over the history of why police were formed. To catch runaway slaves, enslaved people. Who should be scared? The people of the police. The people, African Americans, should be afraid. I am so sorry to say that I do not know right now 10 Native Americans, because their people were killed.
Yes, they were.
Who should be afraid? The Native Americans. Now let's talk about how media is unfairly targeting brown people right now across the nation. Who should be afraid? Them. We are the ones that should be in fear of our lives. It's not them. That's not an excuse. But now let's say it is. Let's say that's an okay excuse as to why you can open fire. What happens if you fuck up on the job? Right. You're fired. You're fired. It doesn't matter where you work. You are fired. You're done. You mess up on the job, you're done. You're fired. That's it. But now let's say what happens in the circumstance of manslaughter where you accidentally kill someone. Where do you go? Jail. Jail. You go to jail. You get fired and you go to jail. That's what happens to every single one of us, but it doesn't happen to any police. That's a problem. That is a problem. That is a problem. That's a problem. That's a problem. But now let's talk about the solutions, and here's what breaks my heart, is that there is a solution. The first solution, firing. But the second solution is policy. You cannot sue police officers. You cannot sue directly the officer that charged. You have to sue the overall system. And you know what happens then. We know what happens. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. You cannot sue that officer. They know the solution. The solution is accountability. But there is none.
It is unacceptable that black and brown people in this city have to fear the police.
Now let's get to the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, by which the Yale Police Department officers have to abide. They have to. Let me read this. As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. Does what happened to Stephanie and Paul sound like the police officer abided by the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics?
No!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No racist!
Police! This is what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop! Ain't Paul! Stephanie! Stephanie! Paul! Stephanie! Paul! Stephanie! Paul! Stephanie!
What's his name?
Paul!
Say her name!
Stephanie!
Say his name!
Paul!
Justice for?
Stephanie!
Justice for?
Paul!
Justice for?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop!
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop!
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop!
Say what?
Ain't no power like the power of the people, because the power of the people don't stop!
Say what?
Ain't no power.
This protest shut down New Haven streets for something like 5 hours. As we record, both policemen have been suspended. Protests continue. There is a wise call for the disarming of Yale police. Now, the first part of Frida Berrigan's talk for promoting enduring peace, which she entitled, "Nuclear Weapons Have Destroyed My Life, and They're Destroying Yours, Too."
I thought a lot about what I would say in a lecture such as this, and wanted to do something really different than many of the lectures I've attended about nuclear weapons in the past. Something different from the barrage of facts and figures and just sort of the information that comes at audiences about these issues. And I also thought that an audience such as yourselves would actually probably know most of this stuff already, right? You know the list of 9 countries who possess nuclear weapons: France, China, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, in addition to the United States and Russia. You know that these 9 countries together possess almost 15,000 nuclear weapons, give or take, and that the United States and Russia account for more than 90% of those weapons. You know all about it, and it was already mentioned here tonight, about the United States' plans to modernize our arsenal to the tune of almost $500 billion over the next 10 years. And I think you also know that while Donald Trump is more dangerous, perhaps, than other presidents in his recklessness, his overriding need to win and to appear to win at all costs, you also know that every president of the nuclear age has played his own part in extending the nuclear nightmare and increasing the threat of global annihilation. Right? So those are sort of the facts on the ground, and I could spend 45 minutes talking about those and unpacking those, talking about short range and long range missiles and where they are and all of that. Or I could tell a very different story. And so this is the story that I've chosen to tell. And it's sort of my own story, sort of the story of my family and all of the others who are, in a sense, bucket brigading responsibility and sacrifice in an effort to douse the nuclear inferno. And so I start with this, and I kind of love the title that I came up with, and then I had to kind of figure out what to say about this title, right? Nuclear weapons ruined my life. So this is a story in 6 or 7 episodes throughout my life. April 1st, 1974, I am born, and it's a home birth to a nun and a priest in the basement of a tall 3-story row house in Baltimore. And that row house is full of anti-nuclear activists. The day I'm born, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists doomsday clock stands at 12 minutes to nuclear midnight. I'll take a moment and silence our cell phones. It stands at 12 minutes to nuclear midnight, and it was moved back in 1972, so it had been at 12 minutes for a couple years. It was moved back after the United States and the Soviet Union signed the SALT agreements. But a few months after I'm born, the scientists move the clock forward, and they move it to 9 minutes to nuclear midnight, in recognition that our hopes of awakening, of sanity, were premature, and that the danger of nuclear doomsday is measurably greater today than it was in 1972. And this doomsday clock will throughout my life, of course I don't know this right now, will sort of be a metronome, will be an ever-present sort of tick-tock throughout my life. I might be the only almost 45-year-old who pays very close attention to the doomsday clock. I will always know throughout my life what time it is. And not in the like Hamilton, what time is it kind of way. So in 1974, Nixon was president, right? He was a nuclear hothead. He perfected the madman strategy of nuclear diplomacy. He once told a meeting of congressmen, I can go to my office, pick up the telephone, and in 25 minutes, millions of people will be dead. So this is the world that I was born into. But I was blissfully unaware, a happy, healthy baby, the first of 3, born to parents who had set themselves on a course that perhaps should have precluded children of robust, muscular, creative, and risky anti-nuclear resistance. My uncle Dan Berrigan wrote a series of poems to welcome me into the world, and one in part goes like this. You came from Harrisburg pit, you came from Custom House blood, you came from Catonsville fire, you came from jail, you came from a nun, you came from a priest, you came from a vow, yes and no in the great Tao that creeps, a vine, claiming like 2 arms the world's rack for its own dismembering and flowering. And if I could read at the time or understand any of those words, I might have just kind of, wanted to disappear back up into the womb and, try again at some other time. Now, episode 2, March 28th, 1979. We're about to celebrate this anniversary just 2 days from now, right? 3 days before my 5th birthday, the 3 Mile Island power plant suffers a partial meltdown. And as an almost 5-year-old, I hear that word and I see the terror that it provokes, but it is a long time before I really understand what that word means. But my parents know exactly what it means and take my little brother and I to West Virginia, and we stay there for the better part of 2 weeks. We live less than 90 miles from 3 Mile Island, and right in the downward kind of plume of the radiation. We returned to a changed diet. Right? That's the kind of biggest thing that I can remember as a small child. Miso in hot water for breakfast every morning. My mother had read that the healthcare workers in Hiroshima, after the U.S. atomic bombing of 1945, drank this fermented soybean paste. It strengthened their immune system. It cleansed radiation from their bodies. And so there we were, drinking miso every morning. To the 5-year-old palate, miso is disgusting, right? But we drank it every morning for years. The truth is we, every morning, were served a cup of miso, and about, 4 out of 5 times we figured out a way to dump it in the sink instead of actually throw it down our guzzles, or guzzle it, throw it down. Mixing miso with apple juice does not make it taste better. Anybody who's wondering, it doesn't help at all. So in the aftermath of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant fiasco, my parents start to look more deeply at the connections between nuclear weapons and nuclear power, right? And kind of link these two struggles in important ways. Episode 3, September 9th, 1980. At this point, I'm 6 years old, and my brother's 5. My brother's name is Jerry, by the way. And our father and 7 others gain access to General Electric's nuclear missile reentry division. It's a plant in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. A few months earlier, the doomsday clock had been moved from 9 to 7 minutes to nuclear midnight, because in the words of the bulletin scientists, the United States and the Soviet Union were behaving like nucleoholics. Drunks who continue to insist that the drink being consumed is positively the last one, but who can always find an excuse for just one more. My dad and his friends hammer on 2 nose cones, pour blood, and read from a statement. And I'll read a little bit of it. We commit civil disobedience at General Electric because this genocidal entity is the 5th leading producer of weaponry in the United States. To maintain this position, GE drains $3 million a day from the public treasury, an enormous larceny against the poor. We wish also to challenge the lethal lie spun by GE through its motto, "We bring good things to life." And I can just hear the jingo in my mind. As manufacturers of the Mark 12A reentry vehicle, GE actually prepares to bring good things to death. This is a new kind of action, right? It's in the tradition of the Catonsville 9, and 3 of the 8 were participants in that action. But it brings in voices from the Hebrew scriptures that call anyone who's paying attention to beat swords into plowshares, to beat spears into pruning hooks. Our dad wrote around that time, "We love our children and all children, and this is why we are in resistance. This is why we are in jail. We cannot abandon the children, cannot render them to Caesar for our immunity and comfort. And that love for them and for the God who blessed us with them will enrich their lives. And so runs our hope." My brother and I are in first grade at the time. We had just started school, like a couple days before. We are in the same grade. He's almost exactly a year younger than I am, but we start school at the same time. We both know how to read. We're sort of essentially twins, treated like twins, Irish twins, as they say. And this perhaps was not the best time for us to start going to school with the shadow of this action kind of looming over us. We're in a swirl of 6-year-old politics that we mostly don't understand. We're objects of fascination and mild derision by our mostly African-American classmates. We are, in fact, the only white kids in our class. And that might have been okay, but we're also being regarded with pity by our teachers. They've been told what our father has done, they've read about it in the newspaper, and while they know the kind of outlines of the action and that he's basically a good person, they have less context for what he's done than we do at 5 and 6 years old. Our father spends that Christmas in jail. And just before the holiday, we go and visit him. And in the course of the visit, my brother, at 5 years old, says this to him. He says, "Oh, thank you, Dad. You've given us the greatest Christmas present anyone could give." My father says, "What's that? What are you talking about?" Because there are no Christmas presents coming out of this county jail where my father was. And my brother responds, "Your action. You were making peace, just as Jesus was in coming to us at Christmas." And this, I only know this story because it becomes, I don't have an independent memory of it, right? But it's one of those stories that gets told over and over. And it's used at various times to celebrate my brother's thoughtfulness, his sincerity, and at other times to highlight the long downward spiral that the two of us have been on kind of ever since, from that glorious apex of insight and righteousness that we found ourselves at 5 and 6. Our dad faces years in jail, and in a February jury trial, he's convicted of burglary, conspiracy, criminal mischief, and he's sentenced to 5 to 10 years in jail.